Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure for me to open this session. Speakers have a maximum of 30 minutes for reading, 10 minutes for discussion and questions. Let's start with the first paper, Koinonia and the Psychology of Possession by Veronika Konrádová from the young Evangelista, Purkyně University in Ústí and not Labem. It's okay?
Perfect, yeah, thank you.
Sorry for pronunciation. Well,
thank you for introducing me. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening. Before I start, I would like to thank the organizers, as many people already have done before me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I much appreciate that you created such a stimulating and friendly atmosphere. So now I start sharing my screen. Just a minute. I think it should be visible now. I'm not sure if it is variable. If everything is okay. Maybe it's possible to enlarge it if you prefer it larger. We know from the Republic that bigger letters are useful, so I can zoom it, or if it's okay, I will simply start my talk. I can hear no objections, so let's start. In my paper, I will discuss the problem of Koinonia in Plato's Republic. Specifically, I will focus on how this concept is applied in considerations of the social organization of the guardian class, especially in the proposal to abolish the nuclear family in favor of a community of women and children. I aim to reveal the subtle complexity of the social, ethical, political, and psychological aspects of the issue. The textual basis for this analysis will be primarily books 3 and 5, which articulate the idea of common property and shared intimate relationships. A broader context for understanding is then provided by books 8 and 9, which discuss in detail the destructive factors threatening the stability of the polis. In my paper, I suggest a complementary reading of these passages, which helps to highlight the fundamental psychological reasons for the radical rearrangement of the traditional household structure advocated in the second wave of the Republic. Plato famously states that in the guardian class, marriage, the having of wives, and the procreation of children must be governed as far as possible by the proverb, "Friends possess everything in common." This demand appears for the first time only in passing in Book 4, to be revisited and thoroughly explored in Book 5. Following Adeimantus' appeal, Plato let Socrates approach these matters somewhat reluctantly and with an awareness of the radical nature of the proposed measures. To begin our examination, we may ask how unusual and daring this measure is in the context of the times. Certainly, Athenian society was generally monogamous. However, the Greeks knew from the constitutions of other cities and accounts of other people's lives various provisions, including elements of group marriage. They also believed that some form of group marriage prevailed in ancient times until Cecrops, the mythical king of Athens and a civilizing figure, established monogamy. Last but not least, the idea of shared women was given literary expression by Greek dramatists. What is important is the ideology behind Plato's proposal to share women and children in the group of guardians. Plato makes a concentrated effort to demonstrate that this measure would strengthen the unity of the polis. The way to achieve this is to enhance the primacy of the common interest over the private. In this respect, Plato does not also enter unfamiliar ground. On the contrary, by emphasizing the primacy of the common good over private interest, he defends a position widely accepted among the Greeks. The texts of Greek historiography, oratory, or drama attest a clear opposition between public and private interests, with explicit support for the priority of common good over private aims. However, Plato's treatment of this ideological imperative is indeed innovative. Plato offers a profound philosophical justification for the proposal and integrates it into the elaborate complexity of his thought. In the following, I will examine first the argument supporting the proposals for the social organization of the guardians, second, the psychological background of these proposals, third, the social-cultural context against which these proposals are defined, and finally, very briefly, the position of these considerations in the broader scheme of Plato's thought. As mentioned, the guiding aspect of the justification for the provisions in Book 5 is the unity of the polis. This assumption is articulated in the opening question. I quote, is there any greater evil we can mention for a city than that which tears it apart and makes it many instead of one? Or any greater good than that which binds it together and makes it one? End of quote. The desired unity is portrayed as a mental cohesion of the citizens, which is already evoked at the end of Book 3 as an ideology of fraternal kingship among citizens. From this is derived the first requirement for arranging the guardian's life. It means the requirement of shared property and the prohibition of the disposal of physical gold, a requirement that promotes togetherness and eliminates privatization and self-interest in public life. The question now is whether and how this requirement relates to the proposal to share not only housing, meals, and material goods, but even intimate relationships. I assume a close link between these measures. In this, I am critical of voices that deny continuity between the proposal to abolish private property and the abolition of the nuclear family. Book 5 speaks clearly in favor of a unifying view. The connection between the proposal of common wives and children and previous measures is implied in Socrates' words introducing the female law. I quote, I suppose that the following law goes along with the last one and the others that preceded it. End of quote. These measures, it means common property and joint education, are explicitly recalled at 458 CD. The continuity of individual measures is then reiterated in the final assessment of the merits of the guardians' living arrangements, where the community of women and children is presented in direct relation to the prohibition of private property. Thus, we face a complex argument that pursues one central aim, namely the unity and mental cohesion of the city. The multiple measures presented progressively graduate to secure this aim. Here, the focus is on the consistent elimination of possessive tendencies, reducing greed, and expulsion of envious rivalries. In this, Plato can follow the long tradition of Greek theorists who indicate greed as the chief disruptive element in social life. As Malcolm Scofield notes, I quote, Plato echoed a long Greek tradition of political reflection from Hesiod and Solon through many 5th and 4th century writers in seeing greed as a prime force of destructiveness in human affairs, whether in fueling stasis within a city or in powering and then destroying imperialistic ambition, and not focusing particularly on the power of money. End of quote. Money, or simply gold, is conceived here as the universal sign of possessive desire. The symbolism of gold is then applied on various levels. Here, along with the rejection of its physical form, gold sublimates into a sign of mental quality. It is the divine gold in the souls of the guardians. On the other hand, human God represents destructive tendencies that threaten the integrity of the individual and the city. Significantly, the passage in question combines political and ethical perspectives. The prohibition of the private property of the guardians ensures that, quote, in this way, they would save both themselves and the city. A departure from this measure, on the other hand, will make them household managers and farmers instead of guardians, hostile masters of the other citizens instead of their allies. They will spend their whole lives hating and being hated, plotting and being plotted against, more afraid of internal than of external enemies, and they'll hasten both themselves and the whole city to almost immediate ruin. End of quote. So the risk of private property is that it introduces contentious rivalry and power ambitions into the city, instead of concerted cooperation, and makes it many instead of one. The risk of privatization and neglect to the whole is further addressed by the requirement to exclude as much as possible from the private sphere. The reasoning in Book 5 graduates to the requirement of mutual sharing, even in areas naturally considered the most private. Sharing intimate relationships, family ties, beliefs, decisions, actions, and feelings. The means to this end is, I quote, that all these women are to belong in common to all the men, that none are to live privately with any man, and that the children too are to be possessed in common, so that no parent will know his own offspring or any child his parent. End of quote. The subsequent line of argumentation offers an attempt at a radical redefinition of understanding of what is one's own. In terms of relationships with persons, the family is the place where we conceive of others as our own, our parents, our children, our siblings. Therefore, a rigorous attempt to mitigate all possessive tendencies must also reach this sphere. Family relations must not be tied to an exclusive group of one's relatives, but must extend to the whole community of guardians. The use of the phrase "my own" is also undergoing a fundamental revision. Strict unison is required in the utterance of these words. I quote, "Then is the best governed city the one in which most people say mine and not mine about the same things in the same way? It is indeed." End of quote. The same feeling of what is and is not mine leads to the required koinonia at the mental and emotional levels. It is sharing of pleasures and pains, a kind of affective koinonia that is named the unifying element responsible for the unanimous and consonant emotional reaction of the citizens. The phrase koinonia of pleasures and pains, applied in the discussion of the koinonia of women and children, thus points to a situation in which individual interests do not split the community, but the citizens regard the affairs of the whole as their own. Thus, overcoming the individual relationship to one's own, the door is open to a shared and cooperative relationship to common affairs, to our own, so to speak. Now, why is an individual relationship to one's own so threatening? And why must it be so thoroughly regulated? We find the answer in the discussion of in books 8 and 9. Here, the relation to private and individual is set in a specific context. My interpretation intends to highlight a particular unifying element in these passages, labeled for examination as the psychology of possession. This thought complex is explicitly elaborated in Book 9, presenting a profound analysis of the soul's inner dynamics. along with a detailed description of the parallel process of psychological and political decline in books 8 and 9, these passages can further elucidate the motivation for promoting a collectivist way of life in the Guardian's community. The psychological background elaborated here operates with the tripartite structure of the soul. Socrates recalls the three parts of the soul and specifies that to each part belong peculiar pleasures, desires, and kinds of rule. I quote, the first, we say, is the part with which a person learns, and the second, the part with which he gets angry. As for the third, we had no special name for it, since it is multiform, so we named it after the biggest and strongest thing in it. Hence, we called it the appetitive part, because of the intensity of its appetites for food, drink, sex, and all the things associated with them. But we also called it the money-loving part, because such appetites are most easily satisfied by means of money. End of quote. The multiform desire inherent in the appetitive part of the soul is oriented towards satisfying a wide range of physical needs. Money is conceived of here as the common denominator of the desires of this part of the soul, and as the universal means of providing for the whole spectrum of physical desires. I quote, then, if we said that its pleasure and love are for profit, wouldn't that best determine its center feature for the purposes of our argument, and ensure that we are clear about what we mean when we speak of this part of the soul? And wouldn't we be right to call it money-loving and profit-loving? End of quote. Money and profit are thus presented as the universal object of epithematic desire, and the appetitive part itself is accordingly named philochromaton kai philokertes. The uneasy control of these desires, which by their very nature want more and more, is already indicated in Book 4, which introduces the tripartite structure of the soul and refers to the interrelationship of its differentiated parts. I quote, and these two, having been nurtured in this way, and having truly learned their own roles and been educated in them, will govern the appetitive part, which is the largest part in each person's soul, and by its nature most insatiable for money. They'll watch over it to see that it isn't filled with the so-called pleasures of the body, and that it doesn't become so big and strong that it no longer does its own work, but attempts to enslave and rule over the classes it isn't fitted to rule, thereby overturning everyone's whole life. End of quote. These motives, the motives mentioned here, are recalled in Book 9 with new force. The initial analysis of desires builds on the previous distinction between necessary and non-necessary desires and focuses on those that by their nature have no inherent limit and constantly tend to increase so that they become insatiable. These desires have a pleonectic character typically, and their universal manifestation is the lust for money. The uncontrolled burgeoning of these desires then results in the disruption of all human life. It is shown in Book 9 as the image of the parallel life of a tyrant and a tyrannical constitution. In the vivid imagery of Plato's depiction, the tyrannical nature characterized by unrestrained greed is given the name Eros. In this context, Eros becomes a new acronym for a threatening potential latent in the epithematic part of the soul. The erotic madness of the tyranny, in effect, begins with a small but decisive step that initiates the gradual degeneration of constitutions and corresponding psychological types. It is the tendency to secretly hoard private property that afflicts the guardians of the best city. I quote, such people will desire money just as those in oligarchies do, passionately adoring gold and silver in secret. They will possess private treasuries and storehouses where they can keep it hidden and have houses to enclose them, like private nests, where they can spend lavishly either on women or on anyone else they wish. End of quote. Where does this initial subversion originate? We can infer that it is latent in the amplified thumos of the guardians. Paul Ludwig amply comments on this feature. I quote, one's sense of self can apparently be enlarged so as to infuse itself into people and things beyond the self, which then become one's own. Thumos is capable both of savagery toward its own fellow citizens, destroying them along with the enemy when first introduced in Book 2, and of mildness toward its own, recognizing a face that is dear to it, and protecting the familiar in opposition to the alien and strange. The key seems to be educating thumos, like a noble dog, to consider their citizens as belonging to it, and to consider itself as belonging to them. The familiar status quo, like the family of owners whom a dog also owns as his, will then receive the affection. End of quote. Given these dispositions, the guardians will expand the scope of their own to the entire group of citizens when adequately trained. Thus, the thymoidetic capacity to defend self-interest will embrace the whole city. Otherwise, they will begin to retreat into privacy and privately owned property. With this in mind, we can retrospectively assess the demands of strict limitations on private property and intimate relationships. It turns out that the deep psychological analysis into the structure of human desire underlies these restrictions. If acquisitiveness proves to be the guiding factor in the epistemic part of the soul, and if its growth and dominance become the cause of ethical and political disruption, then the proposed measures in the community of guardians are understandable as a barrier to any increase in possessive tendencies. Moreover, there is another dimension illuminating the need to treat the relationships within the household especially, so that they do not stimulate pathological greed. It is the traditional connection between the household and the pursuit of acquisition and preservation of the property. In this sense, a household is a place that stimulates possessive interests by its very nature. Here we can recall the social cultural background against which the Platonic vision is defined. A household is typically a place of concentration and maintenance of property. This task is entrusted to the woman in her role as wife and housekeeper. The woman brings wealth to the house in the form of dowry and continues to look after the carefully guarded valuables in the home. Xenophon offers a telling description of the woman's role as a guardian of the domestic wealth in his Oikonomicus, emphasizing the complementary role of the wife who guards the goods inside the house and that of the husband who acquires these goods through his activities outside the house. I quote, human beings live not in the open air like beasts, but obviously need shelter. Nevertheless, those who mean to win store to fill the covered place have need of someone to work at the open air occupations, since plowing, sowing, planting, and grazing are all such open air employments, and these supply the need for food. Then again, as soon as this is stored in the covered place, then there is need of someone to keep it and to work at the things that must be done under cover. Cover is needed for the nursing of the infants. Cover is needed for the making of the corn into bread, and likewise for the manufacture of clothes from the wool. And since both the indoor and the outdoor tasks demand labor and attention, God from the first adapted the woman's nature, I think, to the indoor and the man's to the outdoor tasks and cares. End of quote. However, this close attachment of the woman to the domestic space has its dark side too. On the one hand, the woman guarantees domestic coherence, but on the other hand, she also represents its greatest threat. Greek literature frequently portrays the case of a treacherous woman, most often a wife, who misappropriates the household wealth and eventually hands over the power of the household to another man. An apt example is Aeschylus' Clytemnestra, who, while verbalizing the duties of a virtuous wife, initiates the disruption of domestic and political affairs. This ambivalence multiplies the vulnerability of a household as a potential seed of ethical and political disorder. Accordingly, Plato treats these risks very radically. He completely transforms the entire economics and erotics of the household. Just as he deals with the sublimation of gold, he also envisages the sublimation of eros. In contrast to the intensified eros destructively dominating the tyrannical soul, the transformed eros of the guardians should drive intellectual desires and foster the pursuit of philosophy. On philosophical nature, we read, quote, "When someone's desire flowed towards learning and everything of that sort, they'd be concerned, I suppose, with the pleasures of the soul itself by itself, and they would abandon those pleasures that come through the body." End of quote. In this sense, eros should unite the guardian community, being a bond that does not put personal passions in conflict with political interests, but on the contrary, in their service. In its pure form, eros frees itself not only from the frenzied desire to usurp everything and everyone, but also from peculiar possessive inclinations inherent both in oligarchic and democratic natures. Finally, let us attempt a few concluding remarks. The considerations examined so far reflect a constant feature that runs through the web of Plato's thought. The risks of firm adherence to what we consider our own are revealed in other contexts too. Elsewhere, we can recognize a strong echo of Plato's characteristically philosophical nature. I quote from the Republic, "It is the nature of the real lover of learning to struggle toward what is. He neither loses nor lessens his erotic love until he grasps the being of each nature itself with a part of his soul that is fitted to grasp it because of its kinship with it. And that, once getting near what really is, and having intercourse with it, and having begotten understanding and truth, he knows, truly lives, is nourished, and at that point, but not before, is relieved from the pains of giving birth." End of quote. The vocabulary used is particularly reminiscent of the Theaetetus, and generally in tune with the erotic dialogues. The unifying point is again the rejection of the proprietary feelings. Purified eros desires no exclusive possession. Indeed, the objects of thought themselves resist being possessed. Therefore, we can observe a constant effort throughout Plato's writing to promote the concept of a living, autonomous, and self-supporting wisdom, growing in the atmosphere of dialogical exchange and mutual sharing. The interpersonal character of pursuing wisdom makes it clear that adhering to our own beliefs, precisely because they are our own, is paralyzing. Genuine dialogue depends on the willingness to give up one's own opinions when they prove false. It means the willingness to give up the affection to one's own. Only by eliminating this affection, it is possible to develop a shared understanding in a mutually stimulating exchange. The text of the Theaetetus reads thus, I quote, "And when I examine what you say, I may perhaps think it is a phantom and not truth, and proceed to take it quietly from you and abandon it. Now, if this happens, you mustn't get savage with me, like a mother over her firstborn child. You know, people have often before now got into such a state with me as to be literally ready to bite when I take away some nonsense or other from them. End of quote. I conclude with this brief hint of a multi-layered use of the motive we have been exploring. Now, in the light of the widely applied psychology of possession, it turns out, or I hope it turns out, that a specific proposal for the community of guardians in Plato's Republic are not an excess of social engineering, but an integral part of a larger scheme of Plato's thought. Now, thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thanks. Thank you very much, Veronika, for adjusting to the time. It's the time of questions. Please short and punctual questions because we have only 8 minutes. Is there any questions to Veronika? Sorry. We can open the audio. Open the audio. Yes. Is there any questions?
Lucas, Travis, and Tushar have their virtual hands raised.
Travis, you have a question?
Yes.
Okay.
So just one point was that, like in the Phaedo, for example, the philosopher's desire for wisdom is referred to as katasis for wisdom and truth. So it seems like it's still an acquisitive motivation. So I wondered about your comments on that. And then also with the philosopher kings, they do have to be forced to come back and do the political stuff, right? So I know people understand that in a different way, but it might be that the desire for wisdom in a way still is in conflict with the political part of their job, and that's why they have to be forced. So I just wanted your comments on those two things.
Thank you. Yes, it's true that the philosopher kings or queens have to be forced to do the politics, but I don't regard it a sign of conflict between philosophy and politics. Probably it is conflict between philosophy and politics as it was practiced in contemporary Athens. But I mean, this is the part of Plato's project to bring the philosophy at the heart of the politics. And why the philosophers are to be forced to
Oh, it's interrupt.
Yes.
Oh.
Well, I will continue, but I'm not sure.
Maybe you turn off the video. No, maybe it's the problem with connection.
The problem is with me. Is it right?
Yes. Without.
Is it better now?
Yes. Without video is better.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't notice the problem. Well, to continue to finish my answer. What's characteristic for the philosophers? They don't strive for power. That's maybe the reason they must be forced to enter politics. They simply don't strive for these for power. So this would be my answer to this question. And well, as regards the problem of possession or possessiveness, well, it seems to me that there are many places or many passages which support this position that philosophical knowledge simply cannot be possessed. This is why I was quoting the Theaetetus. I dwell just briefly on this point, but you know, even if you strive for wisdom and long for it, you cannot definitely possess it. So it means when on the way of philosophy, you're somehow on the way and not and cannot reach the final peak and say, "Oh, I get it."
Well, we have to continue with the second paper. The title is How Are the Virtues Conditional Upon Partnership by Karine Tordo Rombaut from the University Grenoble-Alpes. Karine?
Yes, I'm here. So I'm going to share my screen.
Okay.
So it's here. Okay. So can you hear me? Is it all right? Yeah.
Okay.
And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
A little.
So my title is a bit deceptive, but it's not a big problem, you'll see. My intention is to address the question on what conditions does a partnership depend. So partnership is my translation for Koinonia. This regressive inquiry will be conducted firstly from a social and ethical standpoint, secondly, and subsequently, from an epistemological and dialectical standpoint. First, the social and ethical standpoint. In Plato's dialogue, the word partnership often refers to a group of interrelated people, especially a city taken as a whole. In Republic 1, Socrates argues that any tribe pursuing an unjust common purpose would be more able to achieve it if its members weren't unjust to each other than if they were. What goes for an unjust common purpose goes for any common purpose, be it just or unjust. A certain justice, dikaiosune, is at least needed to ensure the possibility of a joint action and more generally of a partnership. In the Gorgias, Socrates claims that no one would be able to enter into a partnership without possessing such virtues as justice and self-control. According to the eponymous character of the Protagoras, the Athenians themselves deem appropriate that everybody has a share of these virtues, or there would not be any cities. Hence, it is widely admitted that no partnership can function satisfactorily unless the members of the group or the citizens of the city possess such virtues as justice and self-control. Actually, these virtues and the partnership are interdependent, meaning both that partners must possess the virtues and that they display the virtues through participating in partnership. First, so the social and ethical inquiry and its shortcomings. I will focus essentially on Republic 224, where the question how virtue and partnership are conditional upon each other is one of the main focuses. The question put by Socrates to Adeimantus in 2369e 370 contrasts two principles that may be applied in the most necessary city. This is my translation for E anankaio tate polis. So maybe I won't read the text, but I wanted to show it. In Greek, there is here the first principle, Elaikaston tutondei to otu ergon apasi koinon katati tenai, which is illustrated with the example of the farmer. And then the second principle, which leads to me alois koinonunta pragmataikein al oton dioton tau tu pratein. So the first principle requires that each one of the four members of the most necessary city puts his own work at the disposition of all in common. As the farmer, though being one, undertakes to provide food for four, spending quadruple time and labor and sharing with others. The second principle requires that each member avoids the difficulties involved in entering in a partnership with others and does his own part. It is generally taken for granted not only that the two principles are mutually exclusive options of an alternative, but also that Adeimantus goes for the first principle, arguing that it is the easier option. Indeed, since partnership is the very aim of founding the city, the chosen principle is expected to enhance the partnership between the citizens. Yet, later in the dialogue, Adeimantus' choice appears as having set down the most important rule of the city, which is regularly recalled through the phrase, doing one's own part. So, according to the usual reading of the passage, this phrase is here applied to a way of life just the opposite of what it afterwards comes to mean. It is remarked by Bosanquet. Furthermore, on this reading, the second principle is rejected, despite the fact that it might render the organization of the city easier, since it is supposed to avoid the difficulties involved in entering into a partnership with others. The previous remarks do not aim at suggesting that Adeimantus goes for the second principle, construed as entailing that each citizen himself produces what is necessary to meet his own needs. It's one of the readings of the second principles, because it is generally taken for granted that it means that if these principles had been adopted, each citizen would have himself produced what is necessary to meet his own needs. Thus construed, the second principle would admittedly be exposed to the same objections Socrates raises against the definition of self-control as doing one's own part in Charmides. However, my remarks mainly aim at drawing attention to the oddities exhibited by Plato's text in Republic II 369e 370b, and to the questionable assumption on which the usual reading of this passage relies. There is also an interpretation of the verb amelesanta, which is important for this reading. Nevertheless, the development and the organization of the city hinge on the rule endorsed in this passage. The variety of the meanings assigned to the rule in Republic 224 questions the characters' belief that they always follow the same rule. For instance, they say that they follow the same rule in 420b, 421c. The rule is cited as a reason to attribute economic jobs, as in the most necessary city, or to apportion political responsibilities, starting from the formation of a class of guardians, whose political function is both compared with and differentiated from the economic functions. Or even the rule is cited as a reason to specify the moral conduct one should adopt in general. The moral conduct is practicing virtue or even philosophy, which is our most important task. The characters do not entirely overlook the difference between the various versions of the rule. They even go as far as emphasizing it, enough to claim that it would be less detrimental to contravene the economic version than the political version of the rule. They do that as early as 2374a, d, etc. Even though they still invoke the former, the economic version, to account for the latter, the political version. So they make the distinction between both versions, and at the same time they invoke the first one to account for the second one. There are other apparently oversighted points, such as the fact that the rule leads both to introduce imitators and to remove them from the city. The rule eventually turns out to be a track of justice, itself equated with some idea of it. Firstly, at city level, and secondly, at soul level, in keeping with the analogy between justice in the city and justice in one person. Socrates explicitly refers to the initial endorsement of the rule, thus, so to speak, compelling the reader to reread the passage, the initial passage, and to contrast it with the subsequent occurrences of the same rule, also likened to the current definition of justice as doing one's own part and not meddling with what is not one's part. The context of the discovery of the definition of justice underlines the lack of transparency of the rule. For instance, the characters, having failed to notice it was justice rolling at their feet, are as ridiculous as people searching for what they are holding in their hands. So does the distinction between a shorter way and a longer way, although perfectly aware that the shorter way does not provide a precise grasp of the subject, the characters still admit that they have been following it from the beginning. They later agree that the guardians of the city should rather follow the longer way in order to get precise and complete knowledge. Then the distinction between the shorter and the longer ways matches the distinction between noesis, dialectical method, and Koinonia, mathematical method, in the divided line in Book 6. The rule endorsed in 370E 370b is comparable to the hypothesis of the mathematicians whose conclusions are inferred from starting points for which they are unable to account. So, in fact, the rule is a hypothesis, and the conclusions inferred from this rule are as opaque as the rule itself. However, Socrates clearly indicates that at city level, the definition of justice is conveyed not by the economic version, which only provides an image of justice, but by the political version of the rule. Once demonstrated that there are as many classes or kinds in the soul as in the city, the definition is transposed at soul level, suggesting that the political understanding of the phrase doing one's own part still prevails. The condition for being just is that each component of any concerned entity does its own part, thus building the partnership in which the entity is supposed to consist. In short, the just entity is the entity endowed of the power needed to establish and maintain a fully effective partnership between its components, entailing the possession of other virtues, such as wisdom, courage, and self-control, on which partnership also depends. Socrates underlines that the phrase doing one's own part sets down not an external rule, but an internal rule which determines the justice of the whole entity. It is conspicuously not, it does not amount to state that through following the rule, the components will prove to be themselves just. Yet Socrates himself seems ready to shift from one understanding of how the rule defines justice as an internal rule, meaning that justice characterizes the entity whose components are each doing its own part, to the other apparently mistaken understanding as an external rule, meaning that through doing one's own part, one proves to be just. For instance, in 441d E, outos dikaios testai kata otu praton, there is a shift. However, each component is itself an entity whose ability to reach its specific aim relies on the functioning of an inner partnership, hence on each subcomponent itself doing its own part, thus complying with the basic requirement, the rule of the city, for partnership. Therefore, a component can hardly contribute to render the whole entity just without meanwhile itself proving to be just. It is briefly suggested that the virtues of the city originate from the virtues of the citizens. The fact that this reasoning raises the homunculus issue is no objection to it. On the contrary, since the homunculus issue is so obviously entailed by the analogy between city and soul that it cannot but be construed as intentional. I know it has been construed as an objection against Plato, but it seems intentional. The homunculus issue goes together with both indefinite regression and indefinite progression, because the city can be in a larger city and the human being can be the city of a smaller human being. The issue helps explain why the doing one's own part rule eventually fails to fully account for how a partnership can be established and maintained, The problem lies not so much in the rule itself as in the conditions of its implementation, which remain to be fulfilled. The definition of self-control at city level highlights this point. It is prefaced by an explanation of the notion that the same person both controls and is controlled. The explanation conducted at individual level serves to illustrate how the city can both control and be controlled, thus reversing the use of the analogy between city and soul. Self-control at city level relies on the ruler and the ruled having the same opinion about who must rule. Hence, self-control at city level requires that the ruler and the ruled possess self-control as defined at individual level, each of them therefore admitting that the calculating part must rule and thus being both ruler and ruled. It is as if each member of the city had an inner pattern of the external partnership in which he participates only through doing his own part. The homunculus issue emphasizes the fact that partnership depends on the ability of the partners to grasp and accept the allocation of parts between them, each partner nevertheless still sticking to its own. Allocating part properly is indeed a fundamental operation for partnership. In the Gorgias, Socrates claims that justice and self-control, on which partnership depends, rely on proportional equality. The reason why proportional equality prevails over strict equality is that the former only can ensure the propriety of the allocation of parts between partners. The omission of the distinction between the two equalities in Republic 2, the key passage, where the doing one's own part rule is endorsed, confirms that the inquiry conducted from this starting point leaves out important issues. So my second part, which is shorter. The epistemological and dialectical issues. The function of the rulers, indispensable for partnership, is to allocate parts properly and to ensure that each partner does his own part without meddling with the others. The condition for performing this function is indicated in Republic 5 by Socrates' reply to the objection raised against the first wave, which provides a positive answer to the question whether female human nature does have the ability to share in all the works with the male gender, or none at all, or in some but not in others. The objection consists in argumentum ad hominem, based on the doing one's own part rule, which is explicitly referred to as the starting point of the founding of the city, inducing once again the reader to reread the passage. The rule is used as a minor premise in a syllogism. Women differ from men, yet the rule applies. Therefore, a different work must be allocated to each in keeping with their nature. The opponents to the first wave thus argue that this first wave contradicts the most important rule of the city, so much that the objection eventually amounts to self-refutation. Socrates more or less implicitly acknowledges that even though he and Plato's brothers intended not to quarrel but to dialogue, they have been caught by the power of the art of controversy, which has made them pursue verbal contradiction instead of employing dialectics on one another. Socrates specifies what employing dialectic means, contrasting it with their own practice of controversy. So it's the passage 454b. So I just read the end of Socrates' speech. We did not at all examine how we had defined the idea of natural difference or sameness, nor at what this idea aimed when we allocated different activities to different natures and the same ones to the same. This passage sheds a highly critical light on Republic 224, especially on the key passage where the rule is endorsed. The dream, apparently fulfilled through the previous inquiry, turns out to be a deceptive one, from which the characters are now awakening. In the context, the verb koinonein, meaning to share in or to enter into a partnership, is used as a synonym of doing the same parts, namely to phrase the claim prescribing that women perform the same functions as men. Here, koinonein entails a consequence almost opposite to the consequence usually inferred from the occurrence of the verb in the key passage. It is a new inducement for the reader to review their understanding of the very notion of partnership. In fact, in the key passage, what I call the key passage, Plato's wordings make it possible to understand Socrates' question and Eidaimontus' answer as hinting at the fact that the apparently mutually exclusive principles are equivalent and mutually inclusive, thus emphasizing the paradoxical character of the basic requirement for partnership. I don't have time to show the text, but the use of to neglect before the verbs to produce and to spend time allows to construe the second principles as meaning something more congruent with the subsequent occurrences of the phrase doing one's own part in Republic 224. A partner proves all the more to be qualified for partnership and thus able to put his own work at the disposition of all in common, that sticking to his own work and refraining from meddling with the works of his partners, he avoids the difficulties involved in entering in a partnership with others and does his own parts. It's the end of the second principle. So I construe it as meaning that everybody has renounced producing what is necessary to meet his own needs. And so it means that doing so, we avoid the difficulty involved in entering in a partnership with others, and we do our own part. The two options may therefore be regarded as the two sides of the same rule essential for partnership. Likewise, the two apparently conflicting consequences of koinonein prove to be compatible with one another. The Republic 5 passage identifies what can only ironically be called the ultimate condition on which allocating parts, namely the fundamental operation for partnership, depends. This operation relies on a dialectical method akin to the method of division and collection presented in Politicus. The main linchpin of the dialectical method lies in the ability to have a right idea of difference and sameness, or metaphorically put, the ability to identify the joints and to follow them in the natural way, the articulations. In the Republic, even though Socrates refers to the dialectical method, he shows some reluctance to dwell on it, often using a metaphorical language. It's in Book 6 and Book 7. However, the indications given in the Republic underline the natural connection between dialectics and dialogue, the former being called the ability of dialoguing, or even the knowledge of dialoguing. Dialectics is based on the implementation of such a knowledge, the one which generally enables Socrates to save the philosophical dialogue from turning into a controversy. This would certainly provide a relevant clue as to how the research of the right idea of difference and sameness should be conducted, at least if the research itself did not require such an idea, leading to a logical cycle. What I mean is that in Plato, the word translated by partnership, along with the corresponding verbs, designate the Platonic dialogue itself, which is also described as a jointly carried out research. Therefore, the dialectical method enabling to grasp the idea of difference and sameness, which is needed to allocate parts correctly, this dialectical method relies on the possibility of successful partnership between participants in a dialogue. So there is a logical circle. Nevertheless, taken as a paradigmatic example of partnership, the Platonic, or rather the Socratic dialogue, offers a way out of the logical circle. The rules of the philosophical dialogue are hinted at in Republic 1, 348a-b. Socrates differentiates between two approaches that might be implemented in the discussion of Thrasymachus' doctrine about justice and injustice. The first approach consists in setting up argument against argument, logon para logon, waiting for some judges to decide whose arguments are most convincing. The second approach consists in examining how to reach agreement, being both judges and advocates at the same time, ama autoite discastai kai rhetores. Glaucon and Socrates agree to discard the first approach and to endorse the second one. The ability to be both judges and advocate is illustrated in Republic 5 by the dialogue with the opponents to the first wave, in which Socrates plays both the part of his opponents and his own. Being both judges and advocates at the same time does not exactly amount to meddling with what is not one's part. It rather implies taking a self-critical distance without which it would be impossible to comply with the rule prescribing to stick to one's own part. Then the ironically called ultimate condition for partnership, far from conflicting with the basic requirement, doing one's own part, supplements it. This approach is widely illustrated by the examination of the first definition of knowledge in the Theaetetus, where Socrates himself plays Protagoras' part in order not only to give him voice, but to put Protagoras' doctrine to the test and to thus do his own part, implementing his art of midwifery, which involves distinguishing true from false offspring. Socrates' ability to be both judge and advocate reaches its climax when Protagoras himself, playing the philosopher's part, though still speaking through the mouth of Socrates, urges the characters of the dialogue to use sound arguments against him, as a geometer will try to do, rather than mere likenesses. So my conclusion. What makes Socrates an excellent partner is his ability to take heed of his own ignorance, especially his ignorance of the idea of difference and sameness, which he thus goes on seeking without confusing this aim with any deceptive opinion. This ability involves the ability to comply with the principle of non-contradiction and to implement it, as illustrated by the discussion with his opponents in Republic 5. The rule commanding to do one's own part may be construed as a phrasing of the principle of identity. This remark leads to emphasize the logical meaning of the Greek word translated by just, dikaios, which the adverb is dikaios, it's what is logically correct. Partnership admittedly requires complying with the logical rules, such as the principle of identity and the principle of non-contradiction. But the implementation of these logical rules is itself grounded on the soul's power to endorse different or even opposite standpoints at the same time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Karine. We have 8 minutes to questions. Is there any question? Well, Maria Teresa Padilla, sí.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask if you have said at the end that koinonia and dialectic are mutually implied, and if you could go a little bit deeper in that sense, because I think that it is a very interesting proposal in that respect, not that dialectic, the knowing of a dialectical method is a real and important condition for the authentic koinonia. Please, thank you very much.
Yes, this is my contention that dialectics is essential, it's the ultimate condition, because if you want to koinonane, if you want to enter into a partnership, you have to know how to approve the allocation of parts of works. And to approve the allocation of works, you have to be able to make the difference between the works, the allocated works. It's the condition, for instance, for geometrical equality. You have to give the part depending to allocate the parts depending on the natures of the partners. So you have to adapt the parts to the natures of the partners, and then every partner must be able to understand the allocation of parts in order to stick to his own part. And so dialectics is a condition, an ultimate condition to make partnership work. This is my contention. Of course, it's a very difficult condition to fulfill, but my analysis of the Republic is based on the idea that this condition is very rarely fulfilled. In fact, this is the reason why the best partner is Socrates, because he is aware of his ignorance of the right allocation of parts. So this awareness helps him being a good partner, and because he's always ready to examine, to put to the test the allocation and the way the partnership functions. Does it answer to your question?
Yes, a very small point. Is there not just an ontological and epistemological dimension of dialectic? There is also a sort of ethical dimension of dialectic, in the sense that to be a fair interlocutor means that you know how to be a good partnership, know that you really respect not just the questions that the other puts, because you have to be fair when you make the dialogue. And do you think that there is a sort of ethical dimension of the fair questioner, or in general of the interlocutors?
Yes, I do, but I think that the ethical dimension leads to the epistemological dimension, because there is no ethics superior to the ethics of truth. So you have to be logic, to respect, to comply with logical requirements, and to be a philosopher, to be a searcher of truth. So there is a close connection between ethics and epistemology, and the epistemological standpoint and the ethical standpoint. I think that, to be fair, is to be is to stick to the truth.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, 2 minutes for a briefly question.
I have a question, Karine.
Okay.
Thanks for a wonderful paper. I guess the question is just mostly a clarification question. Can you explain how it is you think the response to the first wave in Book 5 is a rejection of the doing one's own work principle from Book 2? I thought I heard you say that, and I thought I read it as well. I'm not sure whether that was your view, because it seems as though what Socrates is saying there is that the disputer has misunderstood the doing one's own work rule, and what they need to do is think more carefully about forms of sameness and difference, and thereby sort of be good dialecticians. But the rule itself, I thought, was preserved. But maybe that's what you said. I just didn't understand exactly what how you thought Book 5 was relating to Book 2 on that point.
Yeah, it's a very important question, because in my reading, in fact, the Book 2 to 4 turn out to be a dream. They turn out to be deceptive. This is the shorter way. This is the dianoia, and dianoia is compared to a dream. So there is deceptiveness in these books, but this doesn't mean that you have to throw them away. But the deceptiveness is underlined in the discussion in Book 5. With the opponents to the first wave, because it's almost it's very provocative to say that, to remark in Book 5 that the characters of the dialogue, the founders of the city, haven't made the difference between natures. They don't have a good idea of difference and sameness. This is the condition to apply the rule in Book 2, to apply it correctly. So it's a kind of avowal of the deceptive character of Book 2 to 4. And at the same time, once you've realized that, you can reread Book 2 to 4 And then you realize that there is a truth in it, but you have to criticize it. You have to wake from the dream in order to read it otherwise and to realize that it conveys another meaning. So the rule, doing one's own part or one's own work is not denied, it's not discarded, but it's the understanding of this rule which has to be examined, which has to be it has to be studied more deeply.
That's great. Thank you. That's very helpful.
I agree with what you said.
Thanks, Karine. Let's continue with the third paper, The Metaphysics of Koinonia of Idea in Plato's Sophist and Statesman by George Rudebusch from the Arizona University. George?
It's an honor to be here at the International Plato Society. And my special thanks to the host, the Centro de Estudios Filosóficos. Gracias, Raúl. Gracias, Lucas.
Thank you, George.
Let's talk about the metaphysics of Koinonia, of Ideai in Plato's Sophist and Statesman. These are the metaphysics of the stranger. I'm going to begin with some basic metaphysics. A competent speaker of language can distinguish between herds, brands, and instances of brands. And I'll use that to help get a point my understanding of kinds, forms, and presences of forms. So being from Arizona, I had to pick a herd of cattle. A brand. And many instances of the brand, present here, present everywhere. Here's a kind of cattle, or it could be a kind, and this could be a form shared by that cattle. And there could be many presences of that form. Now, the point of this metaphysics is that it is natural to understand the stranger's kinds, forms, and presences of forms as just like herds, brands, and instances of brands. Now, a point of basic grammar. Let me talk about two figures of speech, metaphors and metonyms. If X is a metaphor for Y, then X is similar to Y or analogous to Y. If X is a metonym for Y, X is a possession of Y or an attribute of Y. Now, there's other kinds of metonyms too, but these are the ones I'll need. Here's an example of a metaphor from Macbeth. Shakespeare's character says, "I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition, which o'erleaps itself." Macbeth's ambition is similar to a horse that vaults and overleaps itself. So it's a metaphor. Now, by contrast, here's a horse metonym from Herodotus. He writes, when the Lacedaemonian army broke into Attica, the Thessalian horse was first to meet them, Herodotus is not talking about one particular horse that went out to meet the army. Herodotus's word horse here refers to the cavalry. This is an example from Smythe. In his early years, in his 1920s, he looked about like in this photo. Cavalry have horses. Thus, a horse is a possession of cavalry in that sense. And thus, the word horse can serve Herodotus as a metonym. Let me give you one more example of the contrast between metaphor and metonym. Jesus has a fish metaphor when he's calling Simon, Peter, and Andrew. He says to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Jesus' men are similar to fish. Both can be caught by expertise. As you know, the stranger agrees with this particular analogy. Dionysus gives us a fish metonym in Aristophanes' comedy, The Frogs. Dionysus says, "If a rich man fooled them with that story, he'd pop up by the fish." Now, to understand this line, you have to realize that fish here refers to the fish market. And realize that fishmongers were notorious liars. Again, fish markets have fish. In this way, fish are a possession of fish markets. And therefore, the word fish can serve Dionysus as a metonym. Metaphors and metonyms are very common figures of speech. Again, a metaphor is has a similarity or bears an analogy, while a metonym for our purposes will be an attribute or a possession. The point of this basic grammar is that the stranger sometimes uses eidos and idea, his words for form, to refer to kinds. These are metonyms of possession or of attribute for possessor. Just as a herd possesses a brand, a kind possesses a form. I will solve some interpretive puzzles by proposing that the stranger sometimes uses the word form as a figure of speech, a metonym, to refer to kinds. One last thing to do before we get to my thesis, where we'll see examples of the stranger using the word form to refer to a kind. I need to review the Sophist up to the passage we're at to put it in context for you. In the Sophist, the stranger uses the method of division with Theaetetus to try to define the Sophist. They become perplexed by not being. Then they also become perplexed by being. This perplexity leads the stranger to ask a basic question. What sort of association is there between, say, being, motion, and rest? The two decide that just as it takes grammatical expertise to know how letters associate to make words, and just as it takes musical expertise to know how notes associate to make music, so also it takes the expertise of philosophy, dialectic, to know how kinds associate to make divisions. Now, the passage, I put this in chat for you. You can click to download if you want to see the Greek text and keep it in front of you. At 253, D5 to E2, the stranger says that if you have dialectical expertise, you are able to perceive how forms are and are not able to associate. The main event of this talk is to interpret those associations. So here's the text. The stranger says, "The one able to divide kind by kind adequately perceives one form extended all through many things, each one of which lies apart. And he adequately perceives many forms different from each other, encompassed from outside by a single form. And he adequately perceives one form linked into one through many holes. And he adequately perceives many forms everywhere separated apart. And this adequate perception is knowing how to determine, kind by kind, in what way each form is and is not able to associate." So I'll go through and interpret these 4 items on the list. I'll interpret them one by one. First, one form extended all through many things. The puzzle is that a form does not occupy any space. Thus, a form cannot extend through space. Thus, a form cannot extend through many things. The solution is that to say a form extends through many things is to give a figure of speech, for its presences extend through many things. So the literal translation of mian idean diapolon pante diatetamenen is one form extended all through many things. I'm interpreting this as a figure of speech. The literal meaning is many instances. I can do this if I'm not too literal minded and I can see form as being a metonym for instances. The presences, not the form itself, extend through many things. That's not hard to understand. Let's go on to the second Koinonia, a form encompassing forms from outside. Pauline talked about this yesterday, and she's helped me with this paper. This is our second item on the list to interpret. The puzzle is that to encompass from outside requires taking up space outside of something else. But forms do not take up space. Part of the solution will be, once again, to use metonymy, to see the words form and forms in this passage as metonyms for kinds. So what the text says, many forms encompassed from the outside by a single form. What I will take that to be is having the literal meaning, many subkinds encompassed from the outside by a single kind. That's part of the solution. The remaining puzzle is, in what sense do kinds encompass from outside? The solution is in a figurative sense. I take encompassing from outside as an analogy, so a metaphor, for having subkinds with a different nature. Here's the clue I use to give that metaphorical meaning. The stranger uses the verb of encompassing, periakein, in 2 other passages. One he talks about fishing and one he talks about being. He uses the verb of encompassing when he divides fishing fishing expertise into fishing by enclosure and fishing by striking. He says, wicker baskets, seines, snares, and nets catch fish by encompassing them. Observe that the many fish have a different nature from the one basket encompassing them. You can see the fish have a fishy nature, and the basket has a baskety nature. The stranger also uses the verb of encompassing in his argument that being is a third thing apart from motion and rest, where he says rest and motion are encompassed by being. Once again, you can observe that the kinds motion and rest have a different nature from the kind being. Motion has a moving nature, and rest has a resting nature. The kind being has a being nature. So here's the analogy between containers or enclosures and kinds. Containers encompass their contents, and that's similar to the way that kinds have members and subkinds. The container has a different nature from its contents, and being has a different nature from rest and motion in my example. So my literal translation of this passage, the literal translation is many forms encompassed from the outside by a single form. I know that Ideia doesn't occur in the text, but these are feminine, so it has to be Ideia. Figure of speech for many subkinds belonging to a single different kind. And I've also got a metaphor operating in this passage. To be encompassed from the outside is a metaphor for belonging to a different kind. Let's go on to the third item on the stranger's list. One form linked into one through many holes. The puzzle, two puzzles. How can a form be linked into one? And what does it mean for anything to link into one through many holes? To solve the puzzles, once again, I'll let form be a figure of speech for a kind. Then all I have to do is interpret linking into one through many holes for kinds. So let form be a metonym for kind. Instead of one form linked into one through many holes, the literal translation, that's figurative speech. And I'll try to interpret what it is for one kind linked into one through many holes. So all I need to do is that interpretation, linking into one through many holes. Now here's a clue. At 257, see, the stranger says that the nature of the other appears to be chopped into pieces in the same way that knowledge is. My hypothesis for interpreting this passage is that the kinds that need linking into one are those like the other in knowledge, those whose nature is chopped into pieces. Now, let me tell you what it is to be chopped into pieces. To have a chopped up nature, a kind must be upon something. For the stranger, other and knowledge are upon something. The other than the beautiful is upon the beautiful. Now, there's two conditions here that you can observe in being upon. The other than the beautiful is a small part of the greater part, other. Condition one. And condition two, the thing it's upon, the beautiful, is not a part, and it's not a subkind, and it's not a member of other. Likewise, the knowledge of the beautiful is upon the beautiful. That means the knowledge of the beautiful is a part of the kind of knowledge, but the beautiful is not a part, subkind, or member of knowledge. These are just two of the conditions for being upon. There may be other conditions. Now, let me interpret what it is for one kind to be linked into one through many holes. Let's call this kind K. K must be upon something. K must have parts, each of which is upon something. And it's those parts that get linked into one. And each part is upon a whole. If K is upon, it can only be collected by referring to the many wholes its parts are upon. And I can talk about that more if there's a question. Let's go to the fourth item. Many forms everywhere, separated apart. This is our last item to interpret. It's quite easy if form is a metonym for kind. The kinds motion and rest have disjoint memberships. The members are everywhere, pante, everywhere, separated apart, right? Everywhere you look in this kind, everywhere it's separated apart from this kind. By contrast, the kind same, other, and being have overlapping memberships because everything is the same, everything is other, and everything is. These members are nowhere separated apart. You can look throughout here and you'll find nowhere where they're separated. Hence pante for that spatial meaning, everywhere. Let me conclude with a few observations about these four items on the stranger's list. Things that, if you have dialectical expertise, the supreme science of philosophy, you adequately perceive these four things. First, the first one, you need to perceive this kind of koinonia, one form extended all through many things. You need to perceive this kind of koinonia in order to collect a kind. Many forms different from each other, encompassed from the outside by a single form. You need to perceive this kind of koinonia in order to divide a kind. One form linked into one through many holes. You need to perceive this kind of koinonia in order to collect a kind that is upon something. And what about many forms everywhere separated apart? I take it that while the first three items in this list are ways in which forms are able to associate, this fourth item is the way in which forms are not able to associate. So that was my task to interpret this passage. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you, George, for adjusting to the time. We have 10 minutes or more to questions. "15 minutes to questions." Well,
I see Pauline has her hand up. Lucas.
any question?
Yes, thank you very much, George. And thank you very much, especially for being courageous enough to try to interpret this very difficult passage. So I think this is something you should absolutely be, we should all be thankful. Yeah, I have many questions, but let me start by just raising one. on the fourth, your interpretation of the fourth element of this passage, and your idea that that change and rest would be an example of this fourth one. I think it's your. I'm not sure I have this exact same slide as you have.
This one.
The fourth one. So
fourth. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, it is. Yeah, so it's further down, around 120, I guess.
Thank you so much.
Yes, exactly. So so yeah, I was just wondering about this example, because of course, you're right. Change and rest have disjoint membership, but we are also supposed to have something in common, since it has been repeated several times in the dialogue. But that being applies to both of them in the same way. So I was wondering, whether we should include in this group 4 things that, like change and rest, that have that it's just about membership, so they have no membership, but still something in common, or whether we should rather be looking for forms or kinds that are really have strictly nothing in common, whereas change and rest seems to have at least being in common. Yeah, so that would be my first question. Thank you.
It's a wonderful question. I'm not sure I have a good answer. I like, right here again, the 2 disjoint kinds, rest and motion, are belong to the kind being. Rest and motion together, so there's nothing that's either rest or motion. This allows me to have them share in some way, right? They're not in every way different, but they're in every place separate and apart. So I like that, using that spatial notion of pante and choris as a spatial sense. It's not meant to be there's absolutely nothing and there's no respect at all that they share. I think it would be hard to find examples of that. But I don't have to worry about that radical separation if I take choris as, again, a spatial metaphor. I wonder if you've got a follow-up question, Pauline.
Well, I think that there are other questions, so better leave them. But then that would be perhaps, a kind of conditional. And that's correct. If we take only this as a spatial metaphor, as being basically about extension. But if someone were to argue differently on this, perhaps then this would come to a worry. But I'll shut up for the moment and see what the others have to say. Thank you, George.
I think Maria has her hand up next.
Thank you. Thanks very much, George, because your paper was excellent. Are you trying to suggest that koinonia and the task of the dialectician are interchangeable terms?
Yes. Sorry, it's a necessary requirement. What he says is, if you're able to divide kind by kind, you adequately perceive these things. And right before this, 253 is where he makes the other connection. Let me see if I can share that with you. 253. I'll share with you White's translation. This might help you talk about the question. Just coming up to the introduction here. So here he talks, here's our passage. And what shall we label this knowledge? Oh, for heaven's sakes, have we stumbled on the knowledge of the philosopher? Does that help answer your question, Maria?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, because it gets a lot.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
And Too Sharp, finally you get a chance to ask a question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Fine.
Okay, great. Thanks, George. That was a great paper, really, really illuminating. So my question concerns the second Koinonia, and then this verb perieko.
Yes.
Which so you're translating that, or sort of thinking of that also as belonging to. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a two-stage here. Exactly right. I take encompassing, periekkein, encompassed as belonging to a single.
Yeah.
Different kind.
Okay, that's great. I just wanted to point your attention to this other passage. It's 249d, and it's right after the children's wish, the children's prayer, where Socrates right after that. That's great. Yeah, 250d. Oh, sorry, 249d. 249d. That's right. So Socrates right after that, not Socrates, the visitor, he says, right after he's sort of developed the children's wish and said that we have to be a child begging for both, we have to state that being is both the unchanging and that which changes both together. He says, well, we've done a fine job of making our account pull together that which is. And the sort of what he's saying there is, so we've encompassed being in an account, in a logos, and sort of he's, I think, underlining how important this children's wish is. Now the Greek there is perieleithanai, which is the perfect infinitive of perilambano, and so I'm wondering whether that could be a substitute as well for periekkein, especially because the periekkein passage that you quoted right after this one, it's the aporia about being, that Pauline was also looking at yesterday. And so I'm wondering whether, so on my reading of the children's wish, what Plato's saying is that change and rest are actually definitional of being. And I think that's that complements what you're saying, that change and rest could belong to being in a way. But I guess, one question is just, do you think the perilambano could be interchangeable here with the perieko? And it's also just peculiar that he's thinking that it's the account, the logos, that is encompassed change and rest, and it's an account of being.
Oh, that's very helpful, Tushar. Thank you. I will take your clue and look at other instances of. Did you say the verb is perilambanein?
Yeah, that's the perilambanein. I think there it's just the perfect infinitive of that.
And I'll be interested to look at where logos or formal objects can be the subject of that verb.
Yeah.
In all of Plato, but I'll also check in the visitor's own usage too, to help me compare that. Evan Rodriguez, has a great paper on this passage, and he takes the puzzle for interpreters in this passage is why the stranger can make a prediction that if we can solve one of these puzzles, we can solve the other one. that's why he's pleased that we've got this. And it's weird. Why would solving being help us with not being? But he equates this to the dialectical method of investigating both sides of the question. Instead of investigating the form being and the form not being, investigate the hypothesis, that which is, and the hypothesis, that which is not. So you can see which one has the problems and so forth. So you've given me the question about perilambanim, which I'm grateful for. And there's this larger question, how to interpret what it means to be a child begging for both, and why you can, if you push through, you'll be able to solve that. And that's part of the issue with translating this particular passage.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Michael, perhaps next.
Yeah, thanks for this paper. And like Pauline was saying, this is a really difficult passage. So I'm glad to see some work on it. So I guess my question goes back to the very beginning, where I guess I'm having trouble quite tracking how you're differentiating forms and kinds. Because I guess like a lot of people would see form and kind to be used almost as synonyms throughout most of the Sophist. And so, yeah, I just wondered if you could say more about like what exactly, this metaphor of talking about herds and brands, what exactly does this mean? And how are you differentiating a form from a kind?
Thank you for that question, Michael. This ability to see the difference between kinds and forms is, as I say, it's natural to speakers to distinguish herds and brands, right? That you have no trouble as a native speaker, and native speakers don't distinguishing these things. And kinds and forms are likewise easily distinguished. Before you get to the late dialogues, right, where Plato uses the word genos, it's not used interchangeably with eidos. In the earlier dialogues, it's used in this way. And you're quite right. And the history of interpretation of the later dialogues is they mark a new metaphysical development and a new methodological development to go along with it. And there's this funny puzzle of what it means to divide forms, because he speaks of dividing forms, and whether forms and kinds can be used interchangeably. And to solve that problem, I have a joint project with my colleague Fernando Muniz, and to solve that, we've distinguished genos and eidos in just the same way to deal with the problem of what it is that the stranger is dividing, or Socrates in the Philebus or elsewhere. So it's got this solution of seeing that distinction is powerful. And our take on the traditional reading, which, just as you say, Michael, is to see genos and eidos as interchangeable, meaning something like class or kind. You see everybody into the 2010s writing this way. Is that's actually not true. A form can be used as a metonym for a kind, just like you can speak of a brand of cattle to refer to the herd. But no one refers to they're not interchangeable, brand and herd, because you can't use the word herd to refer to a brand. And there's nowhere where the stranger uses, if you accept this distinction between genos and eidos as kind and form, there's nowhere where the stranger or Theaetetus or anybody uses the word genos to refer to an eidos. They nowhere use kind to refer to form. And metonymy might permit that, but it just happens to be a usage that the Greeks don't have, and we don't have in English either. I wonder if there's a follow-up, Michael.
I mean, yeah, I guess what I'm trying to do is distinguish, like, just a little bit more on what is the difference just like without this metaphor with the herd and the brand, but just like, yeah, like what I have in mind is this, like, is the claim that forms don't have parts, can't be divided, where kinds do? Is it more along
exactly right?
those lines? Okay.
Exactly right. Think about it. You see the brand up here on the screen. If you divided the brand into parts, what you got would have, this is a hash knife, right? It's upside down. This is the handle of the knife. It's for chopping hash in a fry pan. This is the stem of the knife, right? The brand does have parts, but this is not the kind of parts that we're talking about when you're talking about dividing a form, right? They're always dividing it into the way you divide a kind into a subkind, right? So you can speak about dividing a brand, and you might think you could divide forms, but you'd be referring only to, right, the features of their name in some weird way, or you'd be untangling an interweaving of forms. But there's no reason to think of it as, to go back to that confusion of form and kind, as if these Greek words take on two literal meanings that are identical.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. That's kind of what I was trying to see here, is whether we're kind of just holding this idea that forms are simple, and therefore we can't talk about dividing forms, at least literally.
Right.
Where kinds,
right.
We can talk about dividing kinds. Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
They divide obviously into subkinds.
Yeah,
exactly right.
Well, we are on time. We have to close the session. Thank you very much. And Raúl?
Yes, thanks to the speakers, thanks to Lucas for chairing this session. And I would like just to remind you that we changed the link for the next session this afternoon. And I hope to see you for the last time today and the last time this week also. We're closing today our meeting, and thanks to all. See you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Ya terminó la grabación, Raúl.
Okay.
Eso se puede quedar un ratito ahí nomás, Patricio, ¿no? Y